Hey everybody, today we are going to be discussing underrated actors and actresses, a topic I enjoy talking about because there's a lot of people out there that don't get the credit that I think they deserve. Before we get into that, I will plug my website. As always, it is deepfocuslens.com. I am an artist and I do commission portraits and I sell prints of my work. If it's something that you're interested in, you can always go to the website below. If you have a question about a commission or a print, you can email me as well. My email is in the description box below. Caleb Landry Jones, dude just always acting his butt off. He always brings an energy to his characters like no other, especially in Heaven Knows What and Get Out. Yes, he is a very interesting character actor, and I think there's a looseness to him and an eccentricity that is extremely genuine. I think there's a tendency with young actors, you try to go for somebody who purposely has something really off-putting and quirky about them. And sometimes that works very well. I think in this instance, it works really well. He could easily be just like that eccentric person that you feel really disconnected from, and yet he has a viscera to him and just a natural ability to make everything feel so believable that it really does stick with you. I think the first movie I saw him in was probably No Country for Old Men as the guy who says, "You've got a bone sticking out of your arm," to Javier Bardem's character. But I mean, he's just been in amazing films and with so many different types of directors. I do think though, I am surprised that we don't see him more often. He comes off to me as somebody who could be like the next Steve Buscemi, maybe somebody who wasn't appreciated earlier in their career, but now they've really gotten a lot of recognition for their character work, thankfully. Part of me wonders, and this is all kind of more speculation, but I've seen him in interviews and he comes off as somebody who's a little bit difficult to work with. Sometimes I just question his state of mind in his interviews at times. So really, that's like a perfect example of somebody who has that eccentricity in real life and brings that edge and that unpredictability into the roles, like seamless transition into them, and yet it's still clearly a performance. But yes, I agree with you. I do think Heaven Knows What is an excellent role for him, absolutely. And that's the first time I really saw him in some interviews and thought, oh goodness, interesting guy. Jonathan Pryce, Pirates of the Caribbean, Brazil, Ronan, Glengarry Glen Ross, and Game of Thrones. All vastly different characters, and he commits to all of them so well. He makes it look effortless. People do like him, but I don't hear him enough compared to similar character actors like F. Murray Abraham, who is of course fantastic as well and deserves all the praise. So that's very interesting that you say that, because I always felt like, and maybe it could just be me, it could be my upbringing, maybe I'm just not as exposed to it as you are, but F. Murray Abraham, I hear about him in certain circles. You hear about him more in cinema fan circles, but outside of that, I almost never hear about him. And I always kind of felt that Abraham was an incredible actor that deserved more recognition than he was ever given. For somebody who won an Oscar, especially a Best Actor Oscar, and for their career to kind of taper off and not really grow, is kind of sad. And it happens. It absolutely happens. See it all the time, but it's kind of something that feels counterintuitive. You expect them to kind of explode. But yes, Jonathan Pryce is somebody that I think has little by little gained a little bit more recognition. I still do think that he is underrated, as you say, but you've picked really good roles here. I was really happy to see him in Pirates of the Caribbean. That was a really nice gift for people who really like him. I grew up with him on movies like Tomorrow Never Dies, I believe, James Bond, where he plays the villain. And I think he did a really good job with it. I think he totally got everything that Bond villains should be. He had fun with it, but he was also very menacing. Like, there was just a real sense of fun. I think he really made that movie entertaining. And a lot of it has to do with just that British air about him. Like, I think British style of acting, especially people that, are very Shakespearean in style, it is more kind of mannered, it is more kind of studied, and it has like a very classical sort of quality to it. But I think with Jonathan Pryce, he's somebody that can also really make that feel organic. Brazil, of course, I think is one of his more famous roles, or at least what made him famous, I guess, in movies. And that's also a great role. Riley Keough chooses tricky roles and consistently brings a genuine edge to them, coolly mesmerizing. She's getting steady work and positive notices, but I'd say she's underrated in terms of mainstream status. Yes, oh my God, I so agree with this, because Yes, in one sense, it's like she is getting steady work and she's getting interesting work, a lot like Caleb Landry Jones. If I were her, I wouldn't complain. I'm getting to work with all kinds of interesting people. And yet, for some reason, I feel like it's true. She hasn't really caught on in terms of like the mainstream collective for audiences. I think people see her, they recognize her, and it's like, okay, I know this person. But I don't think people are sitting there going like, oh my God, Riley Keough. And Riley to me has a quality about her that is very, very interesting, very mysterious. I really have a thing where I like actresses who have a quality to them that appears very all-American girl next door, but they have something else in them that is brewing. Something just a little bit maybe unnerving. And she's one of those people, I think, that can be very subtle and bring out a lot as a movie unfolds, which is very cinematic. And I think she's the kind of person that has a real naturalistic quality. She's not, like big performer type, and yet she feels like she fits into every single role, no matter how diverse. And she just has a real maturity for somebody as young as she is, where she can bring out, as I said, real subtlety, but yet it really, really makes a mark in a cinematic sense. Less is more to her, I think, in terms of her acting. And as far as the movies that I've seen her in, and I've seen her in quite a few, she's never hit a false note for me. So I really hope that her star continues to rise as well. Michael Fassbender. He has so many amazing performances under his acting belt, yet mainstream audiences / award voters refuse to recognize him for the talent he is. That's kind of complicated, and a lot of these are complicated, because in some ways I do see them as not underrated. In other ways I do. And I think with Michael Fassbender, he had a period where he kind of hit that jackpot, kind of the critical darling, as well as, being somebody who is accessible in the mainstream with X-Men, as well as movies like Shame, so he could have kind of that versatility of dramatic and then more blockbuster. And I think he's a very good actor. I think he has you want to talk about somebody who has a real ability to stare into the camera and it feels very, very compelling. He certainly does. But at the same time, I kind of understand why he's, tapered off a little bit in the mainstream, just because I think what they tried to do was try to make him a leading man, but I don't know if he quite clicks in that way. Even though he is very handsome and everything, he has, a feeling of being a leading man, but he also has a real hardness to him, like a darkness and an intensity. And his features, his facial features are very hard. And in a cinematic sense, I think that's hard for audiences to latch onto in terms of like a hero, a protagonist, unless said protagonist was more kind of a villain by nature, which is why it makes sense that he would play characters like Magneto. He would play anti-heroes. He's just more suited for that, I think. But I do think it limits him as a performer. I think he's always going to be more cast as a specific type, as somebody who is more kind of a villain. Like in 12 Years a Slave, I thought that was an absolute perfect role for him, because he got a chance to do what I think he's more a natural at, which is, again, being a character actor. And that role just fit him to a T. It capitalized on all of his strengths as an actor, while also keeping him kind of at bay. Not necessarily the focal point, because there is, I think there needs to be more of an approachability to your main character in that sense. Everyone raves about Nicholson in The Shining, but her display of sheer terror sold it. Weirdly, many women seem to hate on her because she was weak. I don't know if that's true. Maybe it's true. I haven't talked to many women about Shelley Duvall. I certainly don't think that she's weak. I think that she absolutely is the strength of that film. I will say a lot of people, men or women, I don't really notice a difference, either really love her in that film or really don't like her. Some people find her acting laughable. Some find it really believable. I personally think it's really believable. I think she did an amazing job and she was perfectly cast. I love Shelley Duvall. Really. She is the perfect character actress. And she was, she did hit that peak in the 70s and obviously with The Shining being so famous. And yeah, I find it interesting, people either really like her or they don't. And it's like, if you see movies with her, especially her films with Altman, she just has an amazing quality. She's very innocent in a way where you just love her. Like she just in the way that she speaks and like her face, she has kind of like a doe-eyed sort of emptiness, but I don't mean that in like a negative way. She's just more sensory. She's not a cerebral type of presence on screen, and yet every role I've ever seen her in, I absolutely fall in love with her. Especially, I think my favorite role that she ever did was Three Women. And I think kind of a difficult role for both her and Sissy Spacek, especially when you see the movie, because you see how they kind of have to transition into different types of roles. It's a very unique kind of shifty type of movie. She has something a little quirky about her, but also something deeply endearing and a smile that just lights up everything. There's a radiance about her. And I like that she has all of these different qualities, and you can pull out different things when you need to. I think The Shining is a perfect example of taking this innocence and this purity, this sweetness, somebody who is so different from, her husband by contrast, and that becomes a really sad thing, watching her get crushed by this presence. And she's the only person here, or in that movie, The Shining, where she doesn't really have a connection to any of it. Like the son does and the father, but she's just there. She's a bystander, and she has to go through all of this in a way where she's very ignorant. I mean, it's not her fault. She's not dumb, but she's just so good-hearted. And that is part of the appeal. And again, she plays those parts very well. But if you watch in movies like Three Women, there's a real dimension to that. She seems very sweet, but there's a lot of flaws in her as well. And I just think Shelley can bring out all the accents wonderfully. Joseph Cotten, he was able to convey depth in his performances in a very elegant and understated manner, which is a fine line to walk. And while he often played more unremarkable characters, think Colleen Martin's, for example, his absolutely chilling performance as Uncle Charlie in Shadow of a Doubt, the quintessential Hitchcock villain, in my opinion, also shows how great of a range he had. I know I would have loved to see him tackle more roles like that. That's really funny. I hadn't seen Shadow of a Doubt in maybe 10 years, and I watched it the other day. And yeah, I think Joseph Cotten was absolutely perfect in that role, just because of what you say. There's something very dry about him and very droll at times, especially in like Citizen Kane. I enjoyed his humor in that, especially as he becomes an old man. But yeah, I like actors who have an invisibility to their technique. I think it's easy for us to go for the big scene-chewing performances, but I like when an actor really has a natural ability to kind of just ease into any role and yet is totally believable in it. And I think that's the case with Joseph Cotten. Holly Martin's, I think, is tailor-made for him, just because, yes, there is something unremarkable about him, and yet he has to have a sort of prowess as an actor and an ability to have a sort of charisma that can also be read as unremarkable in that film. It's like, unremarkable in the cinema is very different from ordinary in real life. And I think that's why somebody like Joseph Cotten works, is because he's a real actor and he can convince you of that very well, but also add that dimension where you want to follow him. And I've seen him in all kinds of movies where, he's playing that kind of character. I honestly think he would have been great as the protagonist in Double Indemnity. I actually think I might prefer him to somebody like Fred McMurray, who I always felt was more kind of putting on a performance. I like him, but, I just never felt the same sort of organic kind of sensibility of a Joseph Cotten. Also movies like Niagara, he's done all kinds of things, wide variety of characters, and yet still kind of invisible. I don't think he's remembered the way that Fred McMurray is, at least, in more the mainstream. He seems more somebody that cinephiles appreciate. But yeah, I would like to see him kind of rise in that way. And I think due to Orson Welles, obviously. I mean, he owes everything to Orson Welles. But the fact that he kept casting him, as he did many of the actors from Mercury Theater, that really helps, because it's Orson Welles. Those actors are going to live on, for many generations. But yeah, so those are a few. And again, I really think it's great to talk about people that are underrated, people that don't get the recognition. It's a positive thing to me. But yeah, that is the video. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you look over here, you will see my patrons. Thank you guys so much for all of your love and support. And if you are interested in becoming a patron, the link for that is below, as well as the rest of my social media information. You can watch more videos here, and you can subscribe if you'd like. Catch you next time.